Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar session of the Open Science and Research Initiative. My name is Esa-Pekka Keskitalo and I'm a Head of Development at the National Library of Finland. And the subject of this webinar are the persistent identifiers and why they are good for you. We are not going very high on philosophical levels and we are not going to go very down below to the technological levels in this webinar, but I'll give you some practical pointers of how to use the persistent identifiers and how you can benefit from them. The key message is that you should have a PID for yourself. You should give your staff PIDs. You should use PIDs wherever you see them. And then I'll discuss some of the problems with referencing to web addresses, which is very useful today, but has many problems, and some issues with how to make things machine readable. You know who you are, or so you think. The lady here is Maria Sklodowska, but you might know her better as Marie Curie. So names seems to be stable, but they are not very stable, and they are not very unique. On the left side of the screen you see very many Antti Virtanens, and these are not the only ones. And two of them also wrote in different names, so names can be very confusing. And even if your name is very unique, it might be written differently in different countries, and the conventions can be very confusing. So what you think is very simply your name is not so very simple at all. Same applies to what you produce, your publications. Prudence was a very popular subject in 16th, 17th century, and there were many people who wrote a book called De Prudentia. And Ola Sigurdsson is from this era, but he also chose to write about De Prudentia. And it might be a little tricky to keep all these old gentlemen apart. And even if your title is not quite similar to another title, it might look quite the same. So there are problems ahead. I said that the web addresses are a problem, and there's some scholarly research about that. So the 3 out of 4 URLs will lead you to changed content. It may lead you to a page not found error message, and that's okay, but it's much more dangerous if the content of a web address has changed and you think you are referencing to the same thing than some other person that did in the past. So what you need is to be identified properly, and your work also must be identified properly. And this is what we do with persistent identifier. They are persistent, that means they work over time. They will work when you are dead or when you have changed your career. They are unique, so there will be no mismatches. All different documents have different PIDs, and all the same documents or copies of the same document should have the same PID. And they are actionable, and that means that they are also links to the resource. And you can click them and it helps you to get to the resource. And they are machine readable. You can say that I'm talking about William Shakespeare, not the writer, but the American football player in the 1930s. But that's very difficult for a computer to understand. So it's much better to have a very simple string of characters to denote to things. That's what the computers understand. So, you and the PIDs. First, we are going to talk about how you can get a PID for yourself, so you identify yourself, for example, in your publications in a reliable way. That's easy for people that work with your stuff, your publications, to work with. So this will be the ORCID identifier. This is pretty straightforward. Then you publish things. And usually the publisher gives your article, for example, a persistent identifier. So you really don't need to worry about giving a PID to your article in a journal, but you must remember that it's there and you must know how to use it properly. But then you can also produce stuff that needs PID and benefit from PIDs. So we'll briefly discuss what you have to take into account when planning your research and planning giving your research results PIDs. Okay, first the personal identifiers or the ORCID identifier for a researcher. So this is pretty much the only current identifier system for researcher persons. There are other ways to identify persons, for example, in national bibliographies and stuff like that, but we don't have to be concerned about that in this point. So ORCID ID is especially for researchers, and it's very easy to obtain one. You can go to the ORCID.org and create an ID for yourself if you don't already have one. It's widely supported by publishers and research administration systems, etc., and very often it's also required by those systems and actors. And it's based on it's a non-profit organization that maintains the system, and it's funded by a vast base of organizations and publishers, so it seems to be pretty sustainable in the long run. In the top of the screen, you can see my ORCID identifier. I am not a researcher, so there's not very much stuff in there. On the screen, you can see my presence in ORCID.org. Remember that you shall have only one ORCID identifier, so you don't apply for a new one in any case. And you have to do it pretty much yourself because the ORCID organization requires your consent to create an ORCID for you. So even if the organization, your home organization, does it for you, they have to ask your permission first. Some people may be sensitive about the fact that the data will go to the USA, so there are certain data security issues there, but the data you will give to ORCID is your public data, it's your public presence, so there will be no confidential data involved. So that's what you have to consider, but at least I'm pretty confident with having my data in the ORCID.org. And as you can see here, it says that the source of the first article is the Tuhat Research Information System. So I didn't have to key in the information about that article in ORCID, but it came straightforward from the University of Helsinki, as I have granted them the permission to update my information of ORCID. So this is, of course, very handy for you. And so this ORCID.org presence can be your sort of curriculum vitae page, and I would recommend ORCID over some other options like academia.edu that are not so public. They are more like enterprises, and there might be problems with what they do with the data. In the right down corner, you see a link to a blog column, a recent blog entry about this thing and the problems with some of these commercial enterprises. So I would trust ORCID's integrity more than some other products. So that's pretty much, you should have an ORCID, and if you don't have one, it's very easy to get one by yourself. Then we are going to discuss persistent identifiers for your publications. And the usual case, of course, is that this is something the publisher does for your article, so you really need not to concern it when you be concerned about it when you are writing the article. And to go back to the screenshot I had earlier, we have here the ORCID in the bottom of this screenshot, doi.org, and so on and so on. And there is a web address, of course, in the address bar of the URL, but as I said, they tend to be not so persistent. To give a parallel, you wouldn't want to say that I love the person who lives in number 12 Kauppakatu Tampere, because that person might move out and someone else might move in, and then the things would get very interesting. So you want to use names, not addresses, and a PID, the persistent identifier, is a name for a document, so use the name. And this you might want to pay attention to when you reference a web resource. Don't straightforward copy the URL in the address bar of the browser, but look at the metadata and find the persistent identifier if it has one. So there's the DOI, use that, don't use the web address. And I will not go through all kind of persistent identifiers there are many. DOIs are the one you see most usually in scientific journals. You may see some URNs and handle identifiers or HDLs around, and there are others. These are good, all of them, and use them when you see them, and you don't have to really care about the technological background and minor differences there. Just to give you another example, here is a handle from the University of Helsinki, so don't use the Helsinki FI address, use the handle identifier. And this is also a link, so it's an actionable identifier. These links, clicking these links will take you back to this page, and if this article would change its location, the handle will then take you to the new location. So that's an important thing in the identifiers, that the information is updated and maintained, so they always know where the stuff really resides. I will point out that there is a citation guide here, how to refer to this article, and this example doesn't include the PID. So the good practice would be always include the PID to the reference. And of course, the styles and guides how to do this in different disciplines are so wide that I can't go to the details here, but whatever way you do it, please use the PID in the reference. That will be a great help for the readers of your article. Now, if you need to give persistent identifiers to your stuff, I think there are two cases here. You may be, for example, an editor of a journal, or you may be in touch with the institutional repository of your own organization, and you realize that the repository doesn't give a PID to stuff, preprints or postprints, for example, that you deposit there, or that your journal doesn't give PIDs to the articles you are publishing. So you might raise this issue and ask why this is so, and shouldn't they also be assigning persistent identifiers to the resources. And the other case is that if you are producing data in your research, and it's a very good practice to give PIDs to your data. What it means to give persistent identifiers to your data can mean very different things. It may mean in the minimum that you give a persistent identifier to your data set as a whole. But in principle, you can give a PID to every single cell in an Excel file if you want that kind of granulation. And it might come very useful when you have to, again, reference the thing in a persistent way to have a little more granularity in assigning the bits to things than to do it on the topmost level only. But of course, all the other sciences and disciplines are so different that it's difficult for me to go into details at this point. But I'm sure there are people, for example, in your library that will discuss these kinds of problems with you. And of course, you are very welcome to contact me after this webinar. You see my contact information in the presentation. So, I mentioned that there are a couple of very widespread persistent identity regimes around, and DOI, especially in scientific articles and papers, is the prevalent one. It's a digital object identifier. DOI stands for that, so it's very versatile and you can give it to pretty much everything. For example, your data sets and data files and so on. The snag is that DOI requires a small fee for every DOI identifier you register with them. So it's only a fractions of cents or a couple of cents per DOI, but it's something to consider too. But it's very well managed and sustainable, so it's a good choice in that sense. And everyone, I think, begins to recognize DOI as an identifier and knows what to do with them. For example, the National Library of Finland provides a URN service, and URNs is a different regime of persistent identifiers. And we are happy to help a research organization or research group out there that needs persistent identifiers for their research data. So you can read more, unfortunately only in Finnish, about our services in the URL, or you can contact us at the email address. You can see it's free. And URNs, I could say, are very flexible in the way you can give them to different things. And we are happy to discuss more about that with you if you are in need of such a system. Handles are also a very handy system, and the DOIs, the digital object identifiers, are actually a subset of handles managed with a little more rigidity as the handle system itself. You can establish your own handle service, and for example, the University of Helsinki uses handles in the Helda institutional repository. So that's one thing. If you are tech savvy, you can consider using handles. So this brings us to the key points again. Give yourself a PID, that is, give yourself an ORCID identifier and use it whenever you mention yourself in a research context. Mention your ORCID. Give your staff PIDs and use the PIDs you get, for example, when you publish in a journal. Remember that web addresses, avoid them if you really need persistency and you need trustworthy references, for example, to your scientific outputs. And remember that machines understand PIDs, they don't understand lengthy explanations of what you are talking about. So, thank you. If you have any comments or now, I can answer them online, but you are always welcome to contact me afterwards and ask more. Help from the National Library, help from the Open Science and Research Initiative. And here's my ORCID identifier, use it. And on the first page of this presentation, you will see that even this presentation have a persistent identifier. So that's a good practice. And please use persistent identifier when you can. Thank you.
No questions or comments at the moment. Maybe we'll wait a while to see if anyone writes something. Nope.
All right. Bye-bye.